Okay, so you want to own a diamond mine, a stretch of red earth in southern Africa, or a frozen tundra in northern Canada, and somewhere beneath it, a pipe of volcanic rock older than the dinosaurs, packed with crystallized carbon. You own the rights to all of it. Every stone that comes out of that ground is yours before anyone else even knows it exists. You're not just wealthy, you're the source. Every engagement ring, every red carpet necklace, every stone that makes someone gasp, it started with you. There's a reason diamonds carry a different kind of power than gold or oil. Gold is money, oil is fuel, but diamonds are desire. They're one of the only commodities on Earth that people don't buy because they need them. They buy them because they were told for nearly a century that they mean something. Love, permanence, status, and whoever controls the supply of that meaning controls something almost nobody else on the planet can touch. That's the dream. But here's the catch. The diamond business isn't really a mining business. It's a psychology business that happens to require some of the most brutal, expensive, technically demanding mining operations on Earth. And almost nobody who imagines owning a diamond mine understands what it actually costs to keep one running, or how fragile the entire illusion of scarcity really is. To understand why this business even exists the way it does, you have to go back to 1888, when a British financier named Cecil Rhodes consolidated South Africa's diamond fields into a single company called De Beers. Diamonds, it turns out, aren't actually that rare. Geologically, there are enormous quantities of them. What De Beers figured out was that if you controlled the flow of stones onto the market, you could manufacture scarcity artificially. For most of the 20th century, De Beers controlled somewhere close to 90% of the world's rough diamond supply, releasing just enough to keep prices high and demand desperate. Owning a diamond mine, historically, meant owning a seat at that table. Miss that seat, and you were digging up rocks with nowhere profitable to sell them. That system has cracked open since then. New producers in Russia, Canada, and Australia broke the monopoly. But the core lesson never disappeared. A diamond mine isn't valuable because of what's in the ground. It's valuable because of what happens to the stone after it leaves. So, how does an owner actually make money once the mine is running? The first revenue stream is the obvious one: selling rough, uncut diamonds by the carat to wholesale buyers called site holders, who purchase in bulk at organized sales events. This is where companies like Alrosa in Russia and Rio Tinto with its Argyle mine in Australia made their fortunes for decades, selling tons of raw material to cutting centers in India and Belgium. But the real money, the money most people never think about, comes from something else entirely: grading. Not every diamond that comes out of the ground is gem quality. In fact, the majority aren't. Roughly 80% of mined diamonds are considered industrial grade, too flawed or discolored for jewelry. Those get sold for a fraction of the price, used in drill bits, saw blades, and polishing equipment. The entire economics of a mine depend on the small percentage of gem quality stones subsidizing everything else. This is exactly why Rio Tinto's Argyle mine became famous. It produced huge volumes of diamonds, but only a tiny fraction were the rare pink stones that made global headlines and sold for millions per carat, while the rest of the output barely covered costs. That's the pattern behind almost every luxury resource business. A small percentage of output creates nearly all the profit, while everything else exists just to make the operation viable at scale. On paper, this sounds like printing money. Except owning a mine means inheriting one of the most capital-intensive businesses in the world before you've sold a single stone. Here's what most people never realize about the cost side. Opening a single diamond mine can require anywhere from 500 million to over $1 billion in upfront capital, long before extraction even begins. You need geological surveys, environmental permits that can take a decade to secure, and heavy industrial infrastructure. Kimberlite pipes, the volcanic rock formations where diamonds form, often sit hundreds of meters underground, which means building either massive open pits or full underground mining operations with tunnels, ventilation systems, and haulage equipment. Then there's processing. Diamonds don't come out of the ground sparkling. They come out embedded in tons of ore that has to be crushed, washed, and sorted using X-ray and laser technology just to find them. A mine can process thousands of tons of rock to recover a single carat of usable diamond. That's not an exaggeration. At some operations, the ratio is genuinely that extreme. Every ton of rock moved costs fuel, labor, and equipment wear, whether or not it contains anything valuable. This is why so many diamond mines that look profitable on a spreadsheet quietly become financial disasters in reality. Consider what happened to the Marange diamond fields in Zimbabwe, believed to be one of the largest diamond discoveries in decades, generating billions in potential value, yet plagued by mismanagement, smuggling, and government seizure, to the point where very little of that theoretical wealth ever reached legitimate owners or investors. And that's before you even get to labor. A functioning mine needs geologists, engineers, heavy equipment operators, security personnel, and refinery staff, often numbering in the thousands for a large operation. In remote regions, you're not just paying wages, you're building entire towns, complete with housing, medical clinics, and transportation infrastructure because there's no existing workforce to hire. De Beers didn't just build mines in places like Botswana, they built cities around them because the mines were often hours from any population center. This is where things get interesting because the deeper you go, the more the diamond business starts to resemble a security operation more than a retail business. Diamonds are small, easily concealed, and worth more per gram than almost anything else on Earth. That makes theft one of the largest hidden costs of ownership. Mines run biometric scanning on employees, X-ray body checks, sealed extraction rooms, and armed security details, because even a small percentage of stones disappearing from an operation can represent millions of dollars in losses. This is also why the industry created the Kimberley Process in 2003, an international certification system meant to prevent so-called blood diamonds, stones mined in conflict zones and sold to fund violence, from entering the legitimate market. Owning a mine today means proving at every stage that your stones are clean, tracked, and certified, or risk being locked out of major markets entirely. So let's talk about what actually happens to your money once the mine is operating. Say your mine produces stones worth $200 million a year at market price. That sounds enormous, but operating costs, labor, fuel, equipment, processing, security, and regulatory compliance routinely eat between 50 and 70% of revenue at many hard rock mining operations. Then there's the debt. Almost no one builds a mine with cash alone. Most operations are financed through loans against future production, meaning a huge portion of early revenue goes straight to paying down the capital it took to open the mine in the first place, sometimes for the first 5 to 10 years of operation. That's exactly the bet Sam Zell made throughout his career buying distressed assets. You don't make your money on day one, you make it by surviving the years where cash flow is thin and debt service is heavy until the asset matures into something that throws off real profit. Diamond mines follow the same brutal math. The early years are about survival, not wealth. And here's the twist almost nobody sees coming. Even if you survive the debt years, diamonds themselves are not a guaranteed appreciating asset. Unlike gold, there's no global diamond exchange setting a universal price. Value is subjective, controlled partly by marketing, partly by grading standards, and partly by how much supply is deliberately withheld from the market. When lab-grown diamonds, chemically identical to mined stones, began scaling production in the 2000s, prices for certain categories of natural diamonds dropped significantly because suddenly the scarcity story had a competitor that could manufacture supply infinitely. Mines that had modeled their returns on decades-old pricing assumptions found their margins collapsing almost overnight. This is the risk most people never factor in when they dream about mine ownership. You're not just betting on geology. You're betting that the entire cultural belief system around diamonds holds steady for the next 20 or 30 years, long enough to pay off your investment. There's also the environmental and political risk, which can end an operation entirely regardless of how much diamond is still in the ground. Governments renegotiate mining rights, regulations tighten, communities push back on land use. In some countries, mines have been nationalized outright, wiping out foreign investors overnight. This is precisely the kind of risk that turned Zimbabwe's diamond fields from a generational opportunity into a cautionary tale, and it's a risk baked into resource ownership anywhere political stability isn't guaranteed. So, after all of that, the billion-dollar startup costs, the debt years, the security operations, the environmental risk, the shifting cultural value of the product itself, is owning a diamond mine actually worth it? For a handful of players, yes, spectacularly. Companies like Alrosa and Rio Tinto turned mining operations into multi-billion-dollar enterprises. And the family behind De Beers built one of the most enduring monopolies in modern business history, one that shaped how an entire planet thinks about love and commitment. When it works, it doesn't just generate wealth, it generates cultural influence most industries never touch. But for most owners, the diamond mine isn't the glamorous asset it appears to be from the outside. It's a decade-long, capital-intensive, high-risk industrial operation that happens to produce something beautiful at the very end of an incredibly unglamorous process. The stone in the ring case took thousands of tons of moved earth, millions of dollars in security, years of unpaid debt, and a fragile, carefully maintained belief system just to exist. So if you still want to own a diamond mine, understand what you're really signing up for. You're not buying sparkle. You're buying one of the most demanding businesses on the planet, with a payoff that depends as much on human psychology as it does on what's buried in the rock beneath your feet.